these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
All right, welcome back, folks. Got a kind of a unique episode for you today. I read this essay in National Review, and you should all read National Review. People always ask me, where should I get news? If you want smart news, go to National Review. And they had their first ever William F. Buckley essay contest, and the subject of that essay would be God and Man at Yale. And they chose a student from Yale, of course, to win that contest. I don't know if that gave you an unfair advantage, Michael, but it was a good essay nevertheless. And I thought it made some good points. And I thought I would use this opportunity to maybe give viewers and audience members just some insights into the environment right now on college campuses. You know, we hear about it all the time. We hear the horror stories. You actually come at it with a little bit more sense of optimism, don't you?
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for having me, Congressman. And I do definitely think that I had a little bit of an advantage in the contest, but nonetheless, So there's a lot of pessimism about college campuses, especially campuses like Yale, and I think rightly so. There's a lot that goes on here that conservatives should not be happy about, and this is kind of what the conservative media likes to harangue on. But and I was expecting something pretty crazy when I first came here last year. But when I actually got here, the story was a little bit more nuanced, as it tends to be, than portrayed in the media. And there actually is a pretty robust conservative community on campus. It's not very large, although there are anomalies, kind of like the Buckley program, which is not officially a conservative group, but it brings conservative speakers to campus, and it has like over 300 members. But the leftism is sort of just the atmosphere, the air you kind of breathe around you. It's kind of the assumption, in any social interaction, and it's the assumption that teachers work from in their courses. But I was not expecting for there to be a robust conservative community. And there is one. There's a number of groups, and this for me gives me a sense of hope. The situation is not quite as bad as we thought it was, and so perhaps there's something we can work through here.
Do you feel like if you want to get into a debate in class, if you really want to put yourself out there, that it's one, is it acceptable to do so, and two, is it worthwhile? Yeah,
that's a good question. So obviously it depends on the class, right? There's not really much you can do in like a STEM class to provoke someone to a political debate. But as far as the humanities, as far as the humanities, it depends on the class. So like it's a seminar is really, I'll say that, the perfect class for
because let's talk about your majors real quick. You're a history and philosophy major, so you got to have a lot of opportunity for some wokeism.
Yes. So in like a seminar, let's say a political philosophy seminar, that would be like the main place for you to be having these kind of discussions. I have, engaged in not debate. It's not really, well, some of it's a little confrontational, but, putting out the conservative perspective. And so, it's a little scary at first, just not because of what the professor is going to think. The professors actually tend to be pretty open to considering other ideas as kind of an academic exercise. The scary thing about it is, how are your peers going to react? And so that's really the main form of, I guess, discrimination that conservatives face on these campuses, is the social aspect. So it's what are my friends going to think of me? Am I going to lose friends? Like, can I come out as conservative? People are going to talk behind your back. I've heard people talking behind my back, but that's something, kind of to expect when you're just the minority perspective anywhere. Yeah.
And this, you said it's the air, and it's the assumption. And I noticed that as well. It's also worth noting, I went to Tufts, which is a better school than Yale. But no, actually, you know what our claim to fame is Elaine from Friends. You might be too young to appreciate Friends. No, sorry, Seinfeld. Jeez, man, I gotta erase that from the podcast. Anyway, Elaine from Seinfeld. She still might be too young for it. She's like, she was walking. There's this episode where she's walking past this homeless guy in New York City, and she yells at him, "You think you know hardship? You don't know hardship. Tusk's my safety school." I'm like, what the hell? You know, that's like our big claim to fame. So it is kind of a safety school for that other one down the street. Anyway, people didn't really wear politics on their sleeve. And I graduated in 2006. This wasn't like ancient history or anything. I was also not as politically aware as you clearly are. I didn't really become political, frankly, until the day I ran for Congress. I had never gotten involved in politics per se. I was very much in tune with policy. I liked think tank work. I liked to think about policy issues. I went to Harvard Kennedy School to do policy. I did not go there to do politics. And then I all of a sudden did. It's a different story. But I do find it interesting that kids these days have to really think about their political ideologies in high school and college in a way that I don't feel that I had to. And did that start in high school? Do you think that changed over time? Or I'm not sure you would have any way of knowing if it changed over time, but I hear it a lot.
So is the question, when did I start becoming politically aware, or?
Yeah, I guess I didn't ask a very specific question. It's more of an observation that,
Okay.
if you want to respond to it. But
Yeah.
do you feel like everything is seen through a lens of politics on campuses these days? And did you feel that way in high school as well?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I went to a very different kind of high school. I went to an all guys Catholic high school.
That sounds like super fun.
Yes. Well, it was pretty fun. But so it's a very different environment.
Yeah. All right. So that is an extremely unique high school. So let's just go to the college campus then.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, everyone has political leanings. I mean, basically everyone has political leanings. But they tend to, I mean, it's not like when you meet somebody, for the first time, they're not like, all right, so like, what do you think of what's going on right now with the Supreme Court abortion case? Like, no, that's not like how it goes. It's just like, it'll come up just kind of because everything's been turned political in these days. The personal is the political nowadays. And so it's just the starting assumption. So, people will just talk, assuming kind of like you're just on board with whatever they're saying. And then if you like react out against it, and they're a little surprised and they're like, whoa, like what are you doing here? Like explain yourself. So, people are a little shocked when they find it out, just because that's sort of the starting assumpption.
Yeah, maybe I'm asking you to make us feel a little bit better. Do college kids still care about what I would think college kids care about, which is partying and just getting through that class as opposed to being some political activist? Is that still the norm for the most part, or not?
Though they certainly still care about partying. Especially last night, they have this giant party. I did not attend, and it got shut down. So they definitely do still care about partying. But no, they're not really exclusive, I guess. They care about partying and activism at the same time.
Yeah, it's what I try to tell people. It's not all is lost. There's obviously a loud minority on every campus, no matter where you go. And there's still a lot of people that maybe haven't decided yet. And so maybe that's a specific question. Do you think that there's still room for conservatives to grow on even campuses like Yale? Now, this is some of the more difficult campuses. Yale is one of the more prominently left-wing college campuses. It's these elite coastal universities where you see a lot of this stuff. But do you think that if we were engaged, if we had the right people making the right arguments, that there's actually room to grow if we could just get to them?
Yeah, so it's not that, I mean, it feels like everybody has a stance on everything, but not necessarily that they've really thought through to get to this stance. And so it's not like you're finding, certainly at Yale, it's not like you're finding 40% of people as independent. Like I haven't decided up my mind on like whether I prefer the Democrats or the Republicans. Like that's not how it would be. But there are a lot of people that haven't thought through their positions to how they've got there. It's just kind of something that they've, imbibed through like osmosis, just through their environment and their high school and everything. And so
they have shallow opinions, and I guess the question is, have they emotionally adopted them yet? Are they persuadables? In politics we would call them persuadable voters, and I wonder what kind of percentage of the kids on campus these days might be actual persuadables, because there's some that are not worth arguing with, and I'm sure you run into this just being a politically active guy on a campus like this. There's certain conversations that just aren't worth having, because there's no way to make a point unless it's a public debate, in which case there's a point to it. But, how many of them are really persuadable, I wonder?
I think that certainly there's not been a lot of persuading going on these campuses. But I think that's more of a result of kind of us going about it in the wrong way, or not going about it at all. But I do think there are a fair number of persuadables. I mean, we have something at Yale called the Yale Political Union, and it really is a space of free and open exchange. It really is. I mean, there are 7 parties in the Yale Political Union, 4 of which are on the right, 3 of which are on the left. I mean, there's some parties on the right that, you're like, oh, well, like, how are you really on the right? That doesn't seem a very accurate description. But nonetheless, there's pretty even split between conservatives and liberals in the political union. And there is a lot of genuine discussion that happens in the political union where people actually care about pursuing truth. They're not just caring about rhetoric, and they're not just caring about, showing how virtuous they are. They are actually pursuing truth. And the fact that, the Yale Political Union is a pretty large group, I think it does show that there's certainly a number of persuadables out there.
And that's good to hear. I mean, it's a practical question for conservatives to have, because I think young people are our biggest Achilles heel. That's where we lose a lot of votes. Now, some of that's natural, right? Because young people are easily persuaded by this sort of revolutionary talk, this talk of utopianism, this talk of compassion, and then they, may or may not grow out of it. But what also is true is that once you start voting a certain way, you're emotionally wedded to that opinion, and it's hard to get people out. I don't want to put you on a spot here, but there was I want to ask you if you have an opinion on this. Is Beverly Gage? She has led the program. What's the program called? The Brady Johnson Program in Grand Strategy. So it's a political program. She had to resign, and this is kind of interesting. As I understand it, had to resign. Didn't have to resign, but chose to resign because the advisory board of donors is predominantly conservative. So is this finally a case of conservatism winning out against the leftist orthodoxy? Do you have a take on this?
Yeah. I do want to be a little careful. I did want to be a little careful as far as like commenting on recent events, just because I'm still on campus and there is some buzz around these things. But what I'll say is, like, this was a group of conservative donors who had donated a large sum of money for this Grand Strategy program, and they wanted the Grand Strategy program run in a certain way, and they thought that some of the things that Professor Gage was putting in her syllabus did not really reflect their goals. And then there was some problem with the administration was threatening to put like observers in the classroom, which seems like sort of a violation of tenure, where you have people like spying on professors. But it is certainly an example of conservatives like exercising institutional power. A lot of time we're pretty reserved to exercise the actual power we have. And so it was an example of that, but I don't know if this is we really want to latch on to this example, because this is sort of an example of the administration imposing academic restrictions on teachers, and it's probably not a very prudent course of action to praise that now, even if ideally, in our ideal world, with our ideal conservative universities, maybe at like Ave Maria University or Catholic University, you'd advocate for the administration to have some oversight over the curriculum to make sure they're actually fulfilling the school's purpose. But at places like Yale or Tufts or Harvard, like, it's probably not the most prudent course of action to go gung-ho about the administration controlling what teachers can teach in the classroom.
Well, then who will? I mean, that's a great segue into your essay, because I feel like you kind of argue the opposite of that in your essay. And it's a good essay, and it's a well-taken point. I mean, because what you talk about, I'll try and summarize it, but then let you take it away. In God and Man at Yale, William F. Buckley makes the point that, academic freedom is not exactly what we should be aspiring to. We're conservatives. We're not libertarians.
Right.
Libertarians say, hey, everybody just do what you do. Okay, that's a very libertarian approach. Conservatism has to have a set of standards.
Yep.
And academics is part of that. And if we're going to make the argument, because it's pretty obvious, and this happens all the time, that the left uses our sort of academic freedom argument against us. They'll say, what are you so afraid of? What's wrong with a few critical race theory courses? You can choose to take them. You don't have to take them. But you point out that, but when these things start getting elevated, especially culturally, above the classics, which clearly has more to say than critical race theory, then we're running into a problem. And we have an interest in indeed controlling the curriculum. That's the whole point of education, is to educate people properly. And, when people say, whoa, are you so afraid of critical race theory being taught? I mean, academic freedom. And I'm like, look, we're also against flat earth theory being taught, because these things aren't good. These things are dumb and bad, and it's a waste of kids' time, and they're very transformative. So tell us about the essay and your general take on it.
So that's sort of the point that Buckley makes in God and Man at Yale. And this is a time where the universities in America, at least he thinks, really start to go down this slide towards leftism. And so what he's making, the argument he's making at the time, is these chants of academic freedom, this sloganeering of academic freedom, is really a guise for something else. I mean, there's no such thing as true academic freedom. Buckley famously gives examples. He says, no one is going to say, yeah, let's bring a Nazi in to Yale to argue for Nazism. Like, no, we don't want that to happen. Some perspectives are bad. And so we set boundaries and we block them out. And so this is a very prudent argument, I think, for Buckley to be making at the time, when the right still had some sort of sway in the universities. And ideally, the function of the university is to inculcate values, to give you a real liberal education, meaning you understand human nature and human liberty so that you can govern yourself before we can start to think about governing the country. But we've really fallen away from this sort of ideal, and it still can exist in universities. This ideal of inculcating the virtues and studying the classics. This can still happen at places where the right, or just your traditional person who cares about the classics, not necessarily on the right.
Yeah, it could be traditional liberals even.
Yeah, where on those universities where the right or just traditional liberals hold sway, like Catholic University or Notre Dame perhaps. But I don't think this is necessarily the argument we want to make on campuses like Yale, because the administration is not on our side. So it doesn't really make sense, I don't think, to say let's give the administration more control over the curriculum at a university like Yale in its current state, because the university the administrators don't currently reflect our values. So it just wouldn't make sense right now.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I see what you're saying. It's a tactical consideration, the same kind of consideration we make in politics all the time. And it's a good conservative question to ask. If we do this, can they do it too? And, we have that conversation all the time at the federal level. It would be nice if we just passed a national voter ID law. But if we do that, then it sets precedent for them to pass a no national voter ID law, quite easily, in fact, although they're trying to do that anyway. So I guess we're kind of past that point, but it's a point well taken. Do you have this conversation when it comes to these sort of competing ideologies or competing philosophies, say again, the classics or traditional liberalism versus Marxism or versus critical theory or versus postmodernism? You're a philosophy major. Do you find yourself in these discussions with fellow students or professors? Have you found yourself trying to defend this and explain why one should indeed be elevated above the other? Because it's the way we frame these things is important. This is how I argue with somebody who says, "Oh, just allow critical race theory," and I'm like, "I'll allow it, sure. However, we must always preface it with, this is still not the right choice. You should learn about it, just like you should learn what Hitler did and why he did it. But you really need to learn about it within a certain context, such as there's a good reason why Western philosophy is the superior form of governance, the superior outlook on civilization, all of it, the superior moral framework. And I don't know that conservatives are very good about talking about that. I think we've gotten better. Do you find yourself in those kind of conversations?
Well, it feels like when these conversations, I mean, I've only been here for a year and a half, so I assume I'll have plenty more. But when we're having sort of these conversations, it doesn't feel like there's a lot at stake. It feels like we're just kind of looking at these things like you're looking at them in a museum almost. So like we'll read, political philosophy of, Rousseau or Locke or the American founders. So it feels sort of like you're just looking at them in a museum and there's not a lot at stake. And this has to do, I think, with something very closely tied to the academic freedom consideration. And that is that what the argument conservatives are making for academic freedom is they're saying it's just good to hear as many opinions as possible, because by considering as many possible opinions, the right one is going to win.
It'll float to the top. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but what this in a way kind of poisons the dialogue from being productive, because we've sort of given in to the assumption that, no, conservatism is just like one of these other philosophies, just like anything you've ever seen in history. And, some people like it, most people here don't. And, you like apples, I like oranges. So what? And the real productive way to have a conversation requires us to make exclusive claims. And that's not something that people like to hear. They don't like to hear you make exclusive claims to the truth. They like you to say, well, that's just my opinion. You don't need to follow it. I come from a religious background, yada, yada, yada. No, it's just me, leave me alone. But that's not the way that you convince anybody to our side. You don't back off and say, that's just my opinion. You say, it's my opinion, yes, but it's also right.
Yeah.
It's also the better opinion to have. And so the problem why we can't have a lot of these, as far as I can tell, these very constructive, like these actual conversations with things at stake, is because there are not almost any conservative professors to make them. And so they kind of just look at this position as something from the past, nothing really at stake with it. There's they say they give polls out every few years, and they say that it's like 7%. I think in 2017 they said 7% of Yale professors are conservative. I'm assuming that a large portion of that is in STEM. And in the humanities, you can pretty much count the conservative professors like on your two hands. There's just not a lot. And so there's no one to really make those arguments. And that's a problem. That's something that we need to work on as conservatives. And it's really a thing that conservatives, it's a problem that we've made for ourselves. This is a point I made in the piece, is we're almost shooting ourselves in the foot, because we tell our kids and we say, those universities like Yale, don't go to there. It's all crazy by now. Get a nice education at one of these other schools where you get a nice classical education, and, don't worry about Yale. But Yale is still an important institution. It still has power. It still has influence. It still has, connections towards our government, connections towards, other powerful institutions, as Harvard Kennedy School. And so it's not something that we can really afford to give up on. It's really very important institutions that are going to shape the future of our country. And so if we care about them, we really need to start making the arguments, parents to kids, maybe high school teachers to students, saying, we need you, a conservative in the university. We need you to go into academia so that the conservative position can actually get a hearing. We can have conversations where something is at stake. And so, it's not something that's like just easy. It's easier to say than to do, right? There's a lot of discrimination conservatives face, especially like going into grad school. It's like people are talking behind your back. It's tough to get admitted to grad school if you have information about you online that shows you to be a conservative. Perhaps if you've gone on like a congressman's podcast to talk about stuff, it might be harder for grad schools, might not give you as fair of a hearing. But we do need people to go into the academy that are conservatives, because it's the only way that we can ever, start to perhaps take some of this cultural ground back.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, and you use the word indoctrination almost in a positive way. It's, we're and I think it's something worth considering. It's not that we're against indoctrination. It's just that we're against the wrong kind of indoctrination. People should be indoctrinated in the great history of Western civilization, indoctrinated into the founding ideals that created all the prosperity that we see here. And I think what you see within the left is this ability to view history as something that can be reset every year, every 5 minutes. Like, let's have a great reset and start from scratch. And let's look at all the ideas, right? So this is how they get us, again, with the academic freedom argument, this sort of everything is on a neutral footing now. Nothing has proven itself more worthy of any other ideology. Let's just start from zero. Let's reset history and let's see what bubbles up to the surface. And it just so happens that you're in a situation where you have all liberal professors, and it makes it quite easy for that ideology to bubble to the surface. And then it's very easy to see how this has happened. And it's really difficult to combat for all the reasons you stated. It's very difficult to re-infiltrate these institutions. And it does seem like some of the only methodologies that we have to do so are through donor money, because a lot of the donors are indeed conservative that donate to these schools. And people feel helpless as a result. I think they feel more hope. They see students like you at Yale making the arguments on their behalf, because tell you what, I wasn't doing it when I was at Tufts. Well, I mean, additionally, like I said, I don't think politics was on everybody's sleeve back then. But it's nice to have young people doing it. Let's end with a discussion real quick on what you think the conservative movement can do better to reach people your age, to get people like you interested. What did you read? You said you consumed a lot of conservative media before coming to Yale. That shaped your beliefs. How do you consume media? How do people your age consume media? And what can we do better to reach people your age and to get to that small fraction of persuadables that I was talking about?
Yeah, in my case, I don't think it was the fact that there was conservative media that is why I'm conservative. I'm just sort of conservative because my father was conservative and he sort of indoctrinated these ideas down. But yeah, the conservative movement, there's no way about it. The conservative movement is losing right now among young people. They are. And I think that some of the blame is a large portion of the blame is on us. I mean, some of it is natural, like you pointed out, just dispositionally, young people, some certain dispositions. But the current conservative movement, the American conservative movement, is missing out on some issues. And like, for example, with the environment, I think that the conservatives, they just don't really have a position. I mean, the position is kind of like, the Democrats' position on this, the Green New Deal is crazy. And so like, we're just gonna hold our ground here. But these are genuine things that young people care about. They care about the environment. And so even if we don't think that, climate change is going to destroy the world, even if we don't think so, we still need to have, some position on it. I mean, some vision for it. It's not enough to just say their vision is bad. Stay with us. And preservation of the environment is itself fundamentally a very conservative thing. This is another thing with the mix up between libertarianism and true conservatism is we get a lot of time caught up because we love freedom so much and we love the free market so much. We sometimes don't take a second to step back and say like, right, this is a good, the free market is a good, but there are other goods we should care about and we can trade them off with it. So for example, the preservation of the environment, this is something that we can care about too. We don't need to set our feet in stone and say, that's just craziness. We need to come up with visions for this. And this is the great beauty of the conservative project is that its great power is imagination. The left's strategy is sort of just to raise things to the ground. They want to, with critical theory, you see it, and there is a genuine form of critical theory, which is like criticizing the current modes of society so as to improve it. But the left's current rendition of critical theory just really wants to deconstruct so as to raise things to the ground. But the great thing about the conservative movement is we build on things. We don't raise things to the ground. We build on the current state of things. And this is where imagination comes into play. And so if we can be very imaginative in crafting policies, say for the environment, or even just a better position on it, so as we don't just seem to be the party of the status quo. That's something that young people don't like. Young people don't like just being the status quo. And so for conservatism to succeed, I think it really needs to offer a genuine vision for the future, not just a look to the past, but a vision for the future in which we incorporate and build on the best of the tradition.
Yeah, I mean, what I tell people is conservatism is a framework for problem solving. A libertarian will always find an excuse why you can't solve that problem, or why that problem shouldn't exist in the first place, but it does because too much government intervention, and then you end up nowhere. And it's not satisfying, even if they're right. I mean, because technically they're often right, technically. And
Libertarians?
Yeah, and ideologically speaking, it depends on the issue, but technically they're not wrong when they sometimes make those arguments, but it's not satisfying, and people are looking for solutions. When it comes to the environment, I fully agree, which is why we focus on the environment so much as building a conservative framework to counter the Green New Deal, and we have. It's called the New Energy Frontier. So we actually have done that, but it's newer. It's a few years old at this point. I think Republicans have finally really gotten on the same page about how to combat these ideas, and they come up with alternative solutions that are absolutely superior. There's a group of us going to COP26 in a couple of weeks to do just that. So it's happening. I mean, the question is, how do you break past the barriers, the dispositional barriers, the emotional barriers of young people to get them to believe you? Because what they do is they believe you're just not coming from a good place. I mean, we think they're wrong about everything. They think we're evil. And that's been true for a very long time, and remains true now. So any solution you give them is often discarded as some kind of trick to just help the wealthy or something, or whatever the excuse they make up. And so it's difficult. What other issues do you think young people, besides the environment, that young people center around, that we can actually persuade them on, right? Because sometimes they'll have positions that you kind of have to throw your hands up and say, I am not going to use taxpayer money to pay off your student debt. There's no two ways about it. But what other issues do you think young people care about?
Oof.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. The environment's a big one.
Yes, that's a good question, but it's also a tough one.
Inequality. I'll answer it for you. Because what I hear all the time is inequality, injustice, and so take it from there.
Yeah, I think inequality is a good one. And it's not that the left doesn't have a point on this. They do have a point, which is that a society should care at some level. If wealth is amassing at crazy levels within a few Silicon Valley tech billionaires, or a few large companies, like there is a genuine worry there, and it's valid that we should be worried about power amassing in giant multinational corporations in the same way that we would be wary of the government amassing a giant amount of power over citizens. And so I think that if conservatives would be more willing to make that argument. I mean, we do see some people. We do see conservatives making that argument, but they tend to do it, I guess, with a lot of the wrong language. I guess we go at it with language where we just say, we don't like the tech companies with this much power because they're liberal. Like, that's what we say. We don't make the argument that perhaps it's bad that the very fact that they have so much control over our politics and our society. So I don't know. I think that even the positions that conservatives do have, they can be formulated in different ways. But I do think that perhaps it's time for the conservatives, the Republican Party, to have maybe a reckoning on what we kind of prioritize more. Do we prioritize the free market above some of these other values?
And it's an interesting topic. It gets into sort of the populist wing of the right, which I'm generally not a fan of, but it kind of depends on what policies they end up with. I think there's a healthy balance of conservatism between getting at the things people care about, but doing so with a conservative problem-solving framework. I mean, that's why it's a superior form of governance and why we should defend it. We got to go. But Michael, thanks for being on, and keep up the fight at Yale. Appreciate you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.